G'day everyone and welcome to Hayes Homestead. In this episode we are going to cover what equipment is really essential for starting a homestead from scratch and what could you really do without till a bit further down the track, and more importantly, how much is it going to cost. What are you doing here? I thought it was a party. It's not a party, it's a farm equipment video. You're not farm equipment. Or are you? No, we'll have some fun later, I promise. So because there are so many different variables and things that affect what you really essentially need and what you can save money on and what you can get later, we're just going to cover the two main variables, which is price and land size. So I feel like if we can cover the pros and cons of getting brand new over secondhand, we can maybe help a broader scope of people decide on where they can spend their money on and where they can save a heap of money, because you already bought a homestead and that is a very large purchase. So if you can budget in some machinery expenses on top of that, then this should help you lighten the load and get a lot of work done a lot quicker. So let's jump in. So first cab off the rank, no pun intended, is lawnmowers. This is probably one of the number one considerations for a lot of people when they are buying their first homestead or moving on to a larger block of land is, do I need a ride-on? Can I get by with a pushy and a whippersnipper? And I think quite honestly that really depends on how much land you are going to have to mow on a regular basis. So your lawn, your pasture. Considering that the country tends to spontaneously combust through the summer months, you are going to want to keep any long grass short through the summer months in order to keep your homestead safe from any fire danger. So I sort of work on the premise that if you have about 2 acres or less to regularly mow, you could easily get by with a push mower and a whippersnipper. The pros of this is they're very easy to upkeep, they don't require a whole heap of fuel, and the blades are very easy to sharpen, and it's quite quick to stick a bit of line in a whippersnipper. The payoff is of course the time you're going to spend doing it, because it could take you a day or half a day, or I mean if you're not very quick and it's quite dense, it could take you a couple of days, and that's absolutely fine, but it does take you away from other jobs that you may want to be doing in that time or that could be weather dependent. So this is the payoff. Very easy to use and very cheap to maintain, but it takes a bit of time to get the job done. So now let's talk budget. So for a mower like this, you're going to look at starting out at about $400 to $500. I would recommend going to Bunnings and getting just like a cheap Victor like I've got here, because if something goes wrong with it due to a manufacturing issue, their exchange policy is really great. But I will recommend keep hold of your receipt, because this will make that process go a lot smoother, and you can just go in, show your receipt, and then you'll be able to just get a new one and you'll be back on the road and you'll be back into what you need to be doing. A whippersnipper, I think you're going to spend about a couple of $100 at the very least, and again you can go cheap as chips because you're going to flog it, and then they increase from there, and I think they go up to about $2,000 if you're going to go with like a still or something like that. And then of course you've got a brush cutter, and this one was about $500, and I got a cheap one again because I knew I was going to flog it and I was just going to get my money's worth, and then later, if my budget allowed, I would be able to get a much better, more reliable one. So all up you're looking at spending about $1,000 to $1,200 for all of this stuff brand new. So now let's talk second-hand market. My personal preference is to probably stay away from second-hand cheap stuff, purely because it's probably already been flogged and you might end up spending more time with it in bits on your bench over doing the stuff that you're meant to be doing. And if you've only got a small window to do certain jobs because of the weather, then you're going to want to rely on these things to start pretty much second pull. So personally, I would say if you could splash out a little, if it's in your budget, to get brand new stuff, you're probably going to save yourself a lot of extra time fixing things or taking it apart or all sorts of other bits of maintenance. Plus they're very cheap to run, their bits are very cheap to put on the ends of them, and the blades are very cheap to replace. So all up, this is quite a good budget setup. So now let's talk ride-on mowers, because you've got your lawn tractors, you've got your zero turns, and the budgets, well, they vary quite widely. So you really have to consider how much grass you are going to have to mow on a regular basis, and of course, your budget. So realistically, if you're going to be mowing anywhere from 3 to 10 or even maybe 15 acres, you're probably really going to need a ride-on mower if you're going to get it done before the end of summer. So if you're going onto a decent sized block of land, you're probably going to want a little lawn tractor, and you don't even have to go brand new. I bought this second-hand. Now, this is an 86 Murray, so it's almost as old as I am. Stuck a new carby on it, and she was good to go like new. I think I spent about $650 on this, and the new carby only cost me $30 for a Briggs & Stratton motor. And the good thing about these Briggs & Stratton motors is, even if they're old, you can still buy parts for them on eBay, and they are generally extremely cheap. And better than that, when you replace a few bits and pieces here and there, you'll find that they're good to go for another few years without having something else to replace. So usually, if you take care of these, replace the oil and take care of the belts and the blades, this will be something that you'll come to rely on. The other good thing about a lawn tractor is it isn't just for cutting grass. You can put a little trailer on the back of it, and it'll help you cart things from A to B. You might find you'll even get a little bit lazy and use this as a runaround to get you around the place without you having to walk really far, especially if you're carting things long distances. This will save you back, and it will save you time. So for an investment of about $2,000 on a second-hand market, or even $1,500, generally, I'm going to say this is a worthwhile investment. And if you can budget for something like this is going to be a workhorse that you'll not only come to rely on, but you'll love driving too. The whole reason I still have it is because it's a lot of fun to drive. And when people come down, it's great to get out and whip around the place, and you can race it around, and you can generally have a bit of fun on it. Obviously, safety first, be careful, don't hit anybody, and don't let kids play on it, because they are still a piece of machinery at the end of the day, and they can still be quite dangerous. But in terms of upkeep, it's not even that expensive. I mean, a belt is about $100, and each set of blades is about $50 a piece. This is a 36-inch cutting deck, so 2 sets of blades, and the carburetor, as I mentioned, was $30. So you're looking at not very expensive parts to fix this up should it ever break. And they're pretty simple machines. So generally, if something goes wrong, you could probably MacGyver something to make it work in the interim while you wait for parts to arrive. So I'm going to say lawn tractor is up there as one of my favorites. So now we're obviously moving into the upper areas of expense for lawnmowers. A zero turn is typically your more expensive end of lawnmowers, and the only reason I actually bought this was because we didn't have a slasher for our tractor that was here when we bought the place, and I needed something to be able to slash the paddocks that first season to make sure that we were safe just in case there was any fire danger. Now, I ended up getting a windfall from a previous employer who was investigated for not paying their wages properly. At $7,500 for this second-hand, it had pretty low hours, and I was very lucky to find it. So there are bargains out there, but again, it is a very big upfront expense when you have just bought a Homestead. Now, this is a very useful machine because it gets around places where sometimes I can't go with the tractor after we've had, say, a lot of rain and areas are quite boggy. I have got the tractor bogged slashing before, so this is a great way to cut grass when you can't use a slasher. So brand new, you could be looking at spending 15 grand upwards on a machine like this, but it has quite a wide cutting deck, which definitely cuts down that time in mowing very large areas. It's extremely nimble, it gets around really quickly, and on top of that, if you have a trailer that you can take this places with and get some ramps, you can maybe do a bit of contracting where you can go and mow people's lawns through the spring and the summer, make a bit of extra money, and hopefully over 1 or 2 seasons it may have paid for itself. Of course, it uses more fuel than, say, your other mowers, but it's that payoff at the end of the day. Time spent mowing as well as time spent maintaining machines like this can sometimes cut down a lot of the time that you spend out doing those jobs and enable you to get onto other things that you need to be doing. So if you can afford it, great investment, but I would say not essential. So moving into the more industrious ways of cutting grass and clearing, of course, you have a slasher. But in order to use a slasher, you've got to have a tractor. So this is a great segue into our next category of machines, and that is tractors. Now, tractors come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They come very compact, and you can get them a lot bigger. And this will obviously depend on the size of the block that you have to how big a tractor you actually need. So bear in mind, if you are going to be looking after, say, 50, 100, 150 or 200 acres, you're probably going to need a tractor and slasher to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So the great thing about tractors is there are all sorts of things that you can put on the back, and they get powered by the tractor itself using the PTO or power takeoff. And this makes a tractor a great utility vehicle for doing all sorts of jobs, given that you can actually get packages that include several implements for you to be able to tackle a wide range of jobs that need to be done on the homestead, such as slashing and clearing, drilling holes for posts, or even using a backhoe to dig trenches. So they're quite a useful utility vehicle to have around. But again, the size of the tractor is obviously going to depend on how much land you have. If you only have a few acres, say 5 or 10 acres, you could quite easily get by with, say, a small 20 horsepower compact tractor. And even if you're going up to, say, 50 acres, a compact tractor is definitely going to cut it. When you start moving into larger blocks of land, say 100 acres or 200 acres, you might want to think about moving up to, say, a 35 like we have, or even a 45 and up. The reason that you'll probably need this power is because the implements that go on the back will be a bit bigger and a bit heavier, and therefore you need more power to be able to run them. And so again, this is the trade-off of a price versus your time. On top of that, the second-hand market for a tractor can be a bit of a minefield. Getting a second-hand tractor, no matter how reliable they typically are, when something goes wrong, it could have it out of action for a few weeks or maybe even a couple of months while you're waiting on parts. So you really need to weigh up your options about how much you're going to rely on it versus how much you can do without it while it's in for repair. So have a good think about it and look at your budget, see what you can afford. If you need a high power tractor but you don't have a lot of money, the second-hand market might be for you. Do your homework and check the quality of the machine before you leap into any purchases. I would strongly recommend not just looking at things online and purchasing straight off the bat and waiting for it to be delivered. First up, you could just get scammed out of a load of money that you don't have to throw away. And second of all, it could turn up and be not as good as the ad had suggested, and you end up with something that is just falling apart at the seams. So you really need to have a good think about what's important to you, how much you're going to rely on it, and how much you need to do with this machine. So let's get into the price. So for a 35 horsepower tractor just like this one, which is a Photon / Lovell / Trident, brand new for the tractor, just the machine itself, and maybe a 4-in-1 bucket, you're probably looking around the region of $20,000. That is a lot of money, especially when you've just bought your own home. But they also do include bundles, so you can get a tractor just like this with about 4 or 5 implements that go on the back, like ours did. And we got a slasher, a backhoe, a post auger, a grader / ripper. We also got a 4-in-1 bucket and these very handy tines. So it can be quite a useful utility vehicle to have around that does a multitude of things. But again, it comes at a price. To get all of that in a bundle, we were out just less than $30,000. That is a lot of money, but it was something that we had budgeted for when we were buying this place, and we really considered how much it was going to cost us to get a decent working tractor to be able to tackle a lot of these jobs and be able to get through as much work as possible without hurting ourselves or breaking something. So I'm going to bundle these two things together because, I mean, they both involve wood. So you've obviously got a log splitter and a wood chipper. So we'll start with the log splitter. Now, we didn't buy this. This was here when we moved in and was part of the sale of the property. And if it wasn't here, would I have bought one? Probably not. Because if you can swing an axe, and an axe is about 50, 60, 70, $80 from your local hardware store, Honestly, this is only going to sit around collecting dust for most of the year. If you can't swing an axe, find a neighbour that has one and ask if you can borrow it for a couple of weeks of the year. Get all your wood cut into rounds and then just borrow it for a couple of weeks. Maybe shoot a few beer vouchers their way and you can get your log split ready for the next winter in not much time at all. The only downfall to this is that you have to get the logs up onto the splitting deck, and that can sometimes be quite heavy. So it's still quite a laborious thing and it's still quite physical to do, but it can cut down the log splitting time. So if that's something you're quite keen on saving, which is time over money, then I mean, yes, a log splitter is fairly decent. You can also get them for your tractor, but would I say it's essential? Probably not. An axe definitely do the job, especially if you're capable of swinging one. So moving on to a wood chipper, one of these can be quite handy to have around your homestead, especially if you plan on recycling a lot of your green waste and things that you have pulled out whilst clearing up your homestead. Even secondhand, you can definitely get a bargain. We bought this brand new and it cost us about $2,000 and we had budgeted for this as well. Takes up to 100mm logs, and I got this particular design because I want to mount it on a platform and move it around and shoot chips or even compost into designated bays, and that's why I like this design over the one with the up and over chute, because that one tends to fire it out. It's a bit harder to collect all your chips and stuff. It tends to spray them everywhere, whereas this one tends to shoot them down into the ground, and for me its purpose served what I needed it for. In terms of second-hand market, you could be looking at anywhere from $300 to $500 to start with, and they could only require very minimal amount of maintenance, maybe a new belt, maybe some new blades, or even just a new air filter, or perhaps even a new carburetor. The parts are very easy to find, and generally you'll find they'll either be a Honda or a Briggs & Stratton motor. So again, parts on eBay extremely cheap, but maybe a 6 to 8 week wait for them to arrive. I would say a very worthwhile investment if you've got a lot of clearing to do and you want to recycle all your waste and put it in your garden. Probably something that you might want to think about budgeting for. Maybe not essential when you get there, but I would say start thinking about it to make sure that you don't end up throwing everything into a pile burn. A very handy piece of kit. Now this lot I'm going to bundle all together because these are things that I'm going to say are more or less extremely essential for starting out on a homestead. Pretty much everything you can see here is stuff that you are probably really going to need, and I would say maybe set out to invest in these things first. So obviously you've got a trailer. A trailer is invaluable when you're on a homestead, especially if you don't have a bin cycle like we do. We have to take our rubbish up to the tip. To buy one brand new, single axle with a cage, and this one tips as well. This was a Christmas present from Danny, and this cost I think $3,000, and we had to go and pick it up an hour and a half away, which is absolutely fine, but that also included your rego. So I'm going to say your first purchase is probably going to be a trailer, but on top of that you're going to need some hand tools to definitely help you do certain jobs around the homestead. So for a start, an axe for splitting wood. If you've got a log burner, an axe can be quite handy for doing a whole range of jobs. A mattock, again, such a useful implement. You can do lots and lots of things with this. It's great for getting saplings out, for digging out roots of small trees you've cut down, like mimosa/wattle, which obviously is quite rampant no matter where you go on what homestead across the planet. A really great tool. Just be careful how hard you swing it, because I have broken the handles of mattocks before, which is why I've got one with a poly handle now, but not a great expense. Less than $100 for a mattock, and it's definitely something that you'll use a lot of. Of course, what homestead would be complete without a shovel and a fork? These are going to be your landscaping tools, so you're going to need these for digging holes, making trenches, all sorts of jobs that you're going to get to eventually, and these are pretty much your basic essentials. So having some good garden tools that don't even need to be expensive. As you can see, I've got Trojan tools that I bought from Bunnings. They're not overly expensive, but I would say you're definitely going to get what you pay for. So if you get something that's cheap with cheap wooden handles, they're going to break, and you're going to be going back to the store to shell out more money on something you probably should have bought in the first place. I mean, these are not even that expensive, and they're not even that flash, but I abuse the crap out of them, and they've held up pretty well so far. So say not the absolute cheapest, but maybe the next one up. Now, if you've watched any of my other content, you probably have seen me using the air compressor. And again, I'm going to say this is one of the most essential pieces of kit for any homestead. It's great for inflating tires. It's great for blowing down bits of equipment. You can put all sorts of air tools on it if you don't want to use particular power tools. It's great for use on working on vehicles. So all round, I'm probably going to say, even if you don't get a brand new one, I got this one second hand. I think 5 years ago. It cost me about 80 bucks, and it still works. Just obviously make sure you maintain it, drain any water out of it, top up the oil in it, and I mean, there's no reason why it wouldn't last. But an air compressor, I would say, an extremely handy piece of kit to have around considering its price. So definitely think about putting this in your budget. So moving on from trailers, we're going into all-terrain vehicles or things with 4x4. These things are not really essential, and they can be quite a large cost. The only reason I had this was because it was a 40th birthday present from my family, and I enjoy riding motorbikes, and joy machines obviously make my heart tickle. So this was a very loving purchase, and something that I use quite a lot of because it can tow things, and it gets everywhere on our property. It gets places where I hadn't been in months just because it's so boggy in certain places that you can't take a ute or a tractor or maybe even your ride-ons up into these areas just because they don't handle that sort of terrain, whereas this goes pretty much everywhere. It's got four-wheel drive, it's got diff lock on the front and back, and it is definitely a lot of fun to drive. Is it essential? Absolutely not. This thing is definitely not anything that should be high up on your purchase list. You only ever really need to get one of these if you're running, say, 200 or 300, 500,000 acres. You've got stock on that land and you need to get feed out to them, or you need to get out to animals to check their welfare. One of these, okay, yeah, it's going to be very useful and it's really handy to have around. Is it essential? Nah. Do you want one? Probably. So moving on to an Australian homestead, it's quite likely you've got trees on your property, and I could put money on the fact that those trees will be hardwood. So you're going to need a chainsaw. Well, chainsaws come in a wide range of sizes and powers and also price. So what chainsaw should you get for hardwood trees to save you making multiple chainsaw purchases, which, I mean, is not a bad thing, but if it's not in your budget, it's not a good thing. So let me help you out. So when we first moved here, this was the chainsaw that I bought because I needed one in a hurry and I didn't really know what I was looking for, so I just bought the biggest one that they had at Bunnings, which was a 50cc. And I bought a Ryobi one because I knew if it broke, I could just take it back and they will replace it. So no biggie. So I quickly realized that this chainsaw, although it has a 20-inch bar, which is not quite long enough for some trees, I mean, it'll cut the mustard, but not much else. Doesn't have quite enough power to get through a lot of hardwood, especially dry hardwood, even with a new chain on it. And this set me back, I think, $400 to $500. And don't get me wrong, it's still useful and it's still good for doing certain jobs because, I mean, it's pretty light. You can wield it really easily. It's not going to make you tired. So it's not a hard chainsaw to use, but it also doesn't have a whole lot of power. So for a lot of these jobs, especially a lot of these trees that are quite wide and already dead and dry, it's not really working too well. So I went and bought another chainsaw, something that I thought would be really capable of what we needed it for, and I'm not wrong. This is a Husky 585. It has almost 90cc, it's got almost 7 kilowatts of power, and with a fresh chain on it, it will cut through absolutely anything like butter. The pro is, of course, very good. 24-inch bar, lots of reach, it's very powerful, cuts everything very easily. The cons, however, to wield this thing all day long, it's going to make you tired. You will get very, very strong using one of these, but It will save you money in the long run because it will cope with the load that you want to put on it, especially if you want to get into milling up some of the timber that's on the property. You really need something that's going to be around that 90cc plus mark to use something like a chainsaw or sawmill, because it has to be able to cope with the load that you want to put on it. Otherwise, you're wrecking your power head out, and then you're just going to be buying more of these. Now, this is not a cheap unit, and I saved up for this because I really wanted one of these, because it's got great reviews, it's very powerful, it's very reliable, pulls almost first time every time. But it was $2,000. That's a lot of money to spend on a chainsaw if you're not in the budget for it. So how do you get something this powerful without spending $2,000? Well, there is an online store called Chainsaw Spares, and Jono, I have already purchased some of their products, and I mean, their service is great. You could definitely get yourself a cheaper, powerful chainsaw from there. I'm pretty sure I've seen something around 90 or 91cc, and I am almost certain that it was about $400 or $500, but the price will be on the screen down here. You don't have to spend this much on a chainsaw, but I really wanted this Husky because it has really good reviews. I know it's reliable, and it starts first time. It's great chainsaw. I really love this piece of kit, and I use it a lot. So in terms of chainsaws, I mean, yes, it is a very essential piece of kit. In terms of your budget, there are definitely budget-friendly versions out there. So keep your eyes peeled, do your homework, and you'll be all right. So the last piece of equipment that I want to talk about, which I almost forgot about, hence the different setup, is a firefighter pump. Now you can see here, this is an Azito firefighter pump that I got from Bunnings, and the whole setup here costs about $1,000. And brand new, this is going to be peace of mind that you know it's going to work, and you should definitely check it regularly through the summer months to make sure that it's putting the right pressure out and it's going to be drawing properly and that the seals all work, so it's something you can rely on when you really need it most. As well as that, you might see on the end of my firefighting pump, I have a cam lock fitting, and I will get to that in a bit. So for the price of about $1,000 for an essential piece of kit, this is definitely peace of mind and something you need to consider when you are purchasing a homestead. And it was definitely one of the first things we bought when we moved here, because you can't really go through a summer without having something you can rely on, and I wanted that peace of mind. So when looking into the second-hand market for these sorts of things, again, do your homework, be careful. You have to make sure that the seals in the pump are all working properly, so it puts out the right pressure, and hoses aren't going to pop off when you need it. So you need to make sure it's something you can rely on, and you need to make sure that all the parts are working, so when you do need it, it's not going to let you down. So the next piece of equipment that I do want to talk about related to firefighter pumps is IBCs. Now IBCs come in a couple of different types. You have food grade IBCs, and then you have non-food grade IBCs, and the difference between price also varies. A food grade IBC could cost you anywhere from $100, $120, maybe even up to about $180 or even $200, depending on where you are and their availability. So a non-food safe IBC is going to cost you considerably less. You'll be looking to spend about $100 to $120, maybe even as little as $80, depending on where you are. And the reason you would want a non-food safe IBC is so you can use this as your fire water tank. When you are in your summer months, you can pop this on a trailer, fill it up with water, and then you can use it with your firefighter pump when you need to douse any areas if there is a fire danger nearby. Which then brings me back to the cam lock fitting. You might notice I've got a cam lock fitting on that IBC, and that is so when I really need it, I can throw my firefighter pump on, the clips go on, and I'm good to go in seconds. Now, a thread for an IBC and then a cam lock, all up, that stuff just cost me less than $100. And I'm going to say that is a worthwhile investment because of the time it's going to save faffing around with threads on hoses and lines when you really need to be getting going and get your pump in action. So a cam lock fitting is definitely a time saver, something I would consider investing in, making sure that you can rely on it in a hurry should you ever really need it. So an IBC, the fitting and your firefighter pump, you're looking at spending about $1,200, and for peace of mind and making sure that it's something that should you need it, it is there for you available. I would say definitely a worthwhile investment, and something you should consider when purchasing your homestead is budgeting in a firefighter pump and maybe an IBC, so you have some means of fighting any fire should there be, say, a grass fire or something nearby that you need to put out in a hurry. So I'm going to say an essential piece of kit. So with so many different bits of equipment that seem both essential and useful, we need to try and whittle it down to just one piece of equipment that I think any homesteader is going to need to be able to lighten their load and get jobs done efficiently. But not everyone can afford things like an ATV or a tractor or even, say, a new chipper. Well, there is one machine I have in mind that is both budget friendly and extremely useful. And on top of that, it's a lot of fun and probably one of my all-time favorite pieces of homestead equipment. And I think the results might just surprise you. So I think hands down, number one best budget purchase is the lawn tractor. You could probably pick one of these things up for less than $1,000 if you really look hard enough. They're cheap to maintain, they're cheap to fix, they're cheap to run. They're very easy to fix. They are so simple. There is nothing complicated about them, especially the older ones. And when something does go wrong with it, you can always MacGyver it and make it work again, and she'll keep on running. And the parts are super cheap. You don't even need to actually buy a proper trailer for it. You could probably make a trailer and attach it to the back. Honestly, hands down, most fun thing you'll ever ride on a homestead. This thing is undoubtedly probably my budget friendly favorite. So if you're looking for a most essential homesteading tool for anyone on a decent sized homestead, I think your best purchase is going to be a lawn tractor. So my last little bonus tip is having these vehicles on your property. It's often a good idea to stick maybe a GPS tracker in them like we have with all of our stuff, or even invest in a security camera system. Not because we expect people to come up here and start nicking our things, but it is peace of mind. Should anyone come onto your property and start snooping around, you're able to get a good look at them. So make sure your security cameras are way out of reach and can get a good view of any areas where your stuff is stored, just to give you that added peace of mind while you're not at the property. And should you notice anything, like we get notifications when people come up our driveway to deliver things while we're not here, if you did notice anything untoward, then you'd be able to call your neighbor and they'll be able to pop round and hopefully scare anybody off, or you can call the police and get them to come and check it out yourselves to stop you from losing any of your hard-earned assets. Now, it's not that crime is particularly prevalent in the country, but having that peace of mind, I mean, it can't hurt, can it? So maybe consider putting this in your budget just to make sure that you don't end up losing anything that you worked very hard for, or losing something that you might rely on. So consider a security system in your budget if you can, just to make sure that you can keep an eye on your stuff while you're not here. So that concludes our video on essential homestead equipment for any new homestead. We hope you found the information in this video useful and help you budget in what you might potentially need to start your own homesteading dream. So if you've enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like button. If there's anything you want to know, leave it in the comments and we try to reply to everyone. If you have enjoyed our content, consider subscribing to the channel because we have loads of great stuff coming up. Lots of projects, building things, more homesteading tips for those who want to start their own homestead and achieve their dream of becoming off-grid. So we really appreciate your support. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See you around.